appreciate it. Yeah, so if you could just take a couple of seconds to fill out the attendance form, we would really appreciate that. It just lets us know which university you've attended from. Thank you. So our topic today is neurodivergence, navigating the recruitment process. My name is Sarah, and I am one of the directors here at EmployAbility, and I've been here since the very beginning in 2006. And I work very closely with our employer partners, and I also head up our student support team. So before we get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about EmployAbility, who we are and what we do. So as we say here, our mission is really to create a truly neurodivergent and disability inclusive workplace. We want to ensure that whatever support it is you need to access a level playing field, you will receive it. And as part of that, we want to make sure that you're aware of your privacy, your choices, and other legal rights of protection under the Equality Act. And as I said, we have been going since 2006. And in that time, we are unapologetic in our drive for a level playing field. And I'm also really proud to say that we have supported over 20,000 students and graduates into employment. So we also work with our employers. So we have our next generation inclusive employer partnerships. And that's to help them to create inclusive workplaces where everybody feels that they belong and are included. And of course, our fantastic next generation inclusive university partnerships. And through these, this enables us to support disabled and neurodivergent students and graduates. But not only that, but it helps us to support university staff and have us working together. So we are really, really pleased to have all of your universities as our next generation inclusive university partners. This enables us to work very closely in partnership with your universities for us to join forces and to provide you with the support that you need to achieve the careers that you deserve. And as part of that, we run our tailored webinars, such as this one. And it also means that you can benefit from the other initiatives and services that we provide at EmployAbility. So that includes our internships, our graduate programs, our insight days that we run with employers, our scholarships. So although we're not a recruitment agency, we do offer outstanding direct opportunities as part of our overall service. This is where you can apply to internships, graduate programs with top employers via our website. So some of the employers we work with are people like Google, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Financial Conduct Authority, British Heart Foundation, and many others. And whilst we're on that topic, we currently have some opportunities that are open now with the British Heart Foundation. These are, I think it's about 4 or 5 graduate opportunities that we have with the British Heart Foundation across different areas. So there are some within software engineering, some technical ones, as well as human resources. We also have some opportunities across their retail area as well. So, you know, if you're interested in any of those or you think you might be, please have a look at our website, which we will share with you. And you'll be able to access those opportunities if you're interested in those. And on the note of scholarships, we have a scholarship open at the moment with a company called Bending Spoons. And they're a technical company based in Italy offering scholarships to disabled and neurodivergent individuals. And we will also be opening some other scholarships with Google. So we also have, as well as our group sessions like this one, we also provide individualized support. And this support takes on a number of different forms. So it really depends on your individual needs, basically. So our support is very, very personalized. It's on a one-to-one basis. So it's dependent on your situation, your concerns, your needs. So we are here, you know, at the end of the phone. You can email us and arrange to have a one-to-one appointment. and we will go through any questions or any advice that you need. We can also provide some advocacy on your behalf. So you may have some concern around, how to talk to an employer, how to ask them for adjustments. It might seem, and rightly so, a very daunting thing to do. So we can advocate on your behalf. So let's say you've had a couple of difficulties accessing some adjustments, or an employer hasn't got back to you, they're taking a very long time. We can contact employers that aren't our partner clients, for example, and advocate on your behalf, as sometimes those employers might not always be aware of best practice. So we can, do that for you. It might be, as I was saying, you might be a bit unsure of how to have the adjustment conversation. It might be making you feel quite anxious. So you might decide to avoid it altogether, in which case you might not be asking for the adjustments that you need. And, we can help you with that. We can step in and take that anxiety and stress away from you by advocating on your behalf. We do appreciate that applying for jobs is very stressful. It might feel like one of the most stressful things that you're doing at the moment, and then having to talk about adjustments on top of that obviously adds to that stress of that experience. So like I said, we want to take that stress away from you. We want you to be able to focus on answering an application form or preparing for your interview or assessment centre, rather than worrying about the side of asking for adjustments. And skills enhancement. So we want to make sure that we can empower and upskill you in every way possible. So we can give you advice on your CVs and application forms, how to answer those tricky competency questions, all the while offering that individualized and tailored guidance for you on how you can improve your chances of success. If you have an upcoming interview or assessment centre, we'd love to hear from you. This is where we can really help you by giving you that specialist advice. And finally, we do run an Employability Campus Ambassador programme. This is where we would love you to be involved in spreading the word about employability, about the work that we're doing. So Mariella runs that programme. If you're interested, please do reach out to Mariella, and she'll be able to give you all the details you need for that. So moving on to our session today and what we're going to be discussing, we'll be looking at barriers that might exist within, disabling practices and environments, others, attitudes, and then we will have some time for questions at the end. But like I said before, please do feel free to ask any questions as we go through. So invisible barriers, the barriers within. So first, wanted to have a look at confidence. So in our experience, we have recognized that sometimes neurodivergent students can feel that they might not be able to apply to certain organizations. They might be put off by the size or, how that organization might look to them, or they may not feel confident about thinking of certain roles that they might be able to do. You may be feeling that, whilst you're in education, things are quite manageable. This is an environment where you're going to feel supported, your adjustments are in place, you know where to go if you need some support or some extra help. And joining the less structured environment of the workplace can feel very challenging. It might feel like a really challenging idea. You might be concerned that you won't be understood, that the appropriate adjustments might not be in place, or you might feel that your particular condition means you can't apply to certain roles. So an example of this could be somebody with dyslexia might think that, their dream role is becoming a lawyer, but they may feel put off by that. Or for an autistic student feeling that they can't do a role that involves lots of client interaction. Or perhaps you don't feel this, but you might be worried that an employer may think this. So what we would say to that is, there is in fact a great deal of support available, both in the recruitment process and in the workplace. By law, employers are required to provide you with any adjustments that you need. And that's at each and every stage of the recruitment process. And of course, later on in the workplace as well. So although I can't say we're in a perfect world yet, awareness around neurodiversity has vastly increased in recent years. And you'll find that many employers will not only be sympathetic and engage in best practice, they could, be actively seeking diverse candidates. Just as I was talking about our programs just now with the British Heart Foundation, these are companies that we work with that are actively seeking people from diverse backgrounds and, with neurodiversity and with disability. And, we have worked with many, many employers over the years, some of them not necessarily actively now, but if you look at our website, you'll see that there are many employers we've worked with and, we would still consider them to be disability inclusive. So these employers, they may value inclusion because diverse teams can make better decisions, or they may be interested in neurodivergence because of the strengths that can be associated with it. So as for the sorts of roles you can do, don't talk yourself out of a particular career that you want. With the right support in place, and it, should be there, there is an excellent chance you can achieve your goals and your dreams. There's no reason at all why you wouldn't be able to do that. So our advice would be to research inclusive employers, like I said, on the EmployAbility website. You may have heard of Disability Confidence Scheme, where employers sign up to meet certain criteria, and that means that they should be encouraging more people with neurodivergence and disabilities into their programs. But yes, if you need to understand or talk more about the types of adjustments that are available, then please do reach out to us. So imposter syndrome, I think, it's something that we all feel at times. And I think neurodivergent students in our experience sometimes might be a little reluctant to ask for the support they might need. They might feel that somehow their needs aren't as real, and that by asking for adjustments in the recruitment process, they might be seen as getting an unfair advantage. And I have heard that from our students and graduates that we work with. They might say, actually, no, I don't want any adjustments. It doesn't seem fair. It might seem like I'm getting an unfair advantage, or somehow that it makes people feel that they're not good enough, and that this will soon be discovered. So what we would say is, 100% you're not an imposter at all. 70% of disabilities are hidden. That's a huge number. And neurodivergent conditions can be disabling in the same way as many other conditions, physical or sensory disability. Neurodivergence is recognised in law, and that's for a good reason. Just because you can't see the neurodivergence in the same way as a physical disability, it doesn't mean that it isn't real. Adjustments are your right. It's not a favour, and you do not need to apologise for asking for those. So guilt, sometimes students we talk to, they feel guilty about the idea of, imposing upon employers with their additional requirements. They might feel that they're being a burden. Everyone put themselves on mute, please. Sorry, yes, so just saying they might feel that they're being a burden, or that if they get adjustments, this could be unfair to others. So absolutely, you're not being a burden. This is your right. If you're hired for the role, it's purely because you have shown that you are the best person for that position, that you've got the skills to do the job. You may have been through a very lengthy recruitment process to get there. So it's not about being unfair to anyone else if you have the adjustments that you rightly need. It is all about leveling the playing field. So employers are required by law to make adjustments in the workplace, and they would expect to do this. You don't have to tell them about your condition before you're offered the job if you don't want to. That is up to you. And employers should be aware of this. And they won't hold it against you at all. So if you want to tell them during the recruitment process, you can, it's your choice, but don't let guilt guide that decision. And as I said, you're under no obligation to do so. So a lack of knowledge, there can be a great deal of confusion about what you have to tell an employer during the recruitment process in order to get the adjustments that you need. For example, I think many students think they have to tell an employer about their particular condition in order to get the adjustments. Or sometimes they believe that they're required by law to disclose their condition. But, you know, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, then that could create a barrier for you. So what we would say to this is, you know, we know that you don't have to tell a potential employer about your condition to get the adjustments that you need during the recruitment process. You only have to tell them about the adjustments you need. You don't have to tell them what your condition is, and they're not allowed to ask you, and they're not allowed to ask any questions about this. This is clearly stated in Section 60 of the Equality Act. Things change once an offer of employment has been made. They are allowed to ask. And in fact, you know, they should be doing that to make sure that they can do everything they can to ensure the proper adjustments are in place for you. But even then, even once the job offer has been made, you don't actually have to tell them if you don't want to. It is always your choice. It is always there. It is always your choice. So the law is there to protect you. So yeah, you know, like I said, it is always your choice in terms of how much you want to tell them. So yeah, as we had said a little bit earlier, 70% of disabilities are non-visible. And of course, the adjustments are available to you. Did anybody have any questions or anything they wanted to add there?
I've got two questions, Sarah.
Great.
The first one, do you need to be diagnosed to receive the support and scholarships, etc.?
Okay. So you don't necessarily need an official diagnosis. If I know sometimes, especially at the moment, it can be a very long wait to have an official diagnosis. So if you you know, if you have some impact that sound as though it could be a neurodivergence, then we'd be happy to talk to you about that. But no, we do have candidates and students that are registered with us that don't have a formal diagnosis.
And then how do you know the best adjustments to have to best help you when working? As I'm a little unclear what would help me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, and that, you know, that's a really good question. And it's something that is very difficult once, you know, you don't always know what you're going to need. Of course, you haven't been in that situation yet. And the adjustments you have at university, you might be wondering how that can translate into the workplace. So, you know, this is where we can help you. This is why we're here. We can talk to you, you know, about the impact of your neurodivergence and disability. We can think about, you know, what it is you're going to be doing in the workplace, and then we can work with you on coming up with some adjustments that would really help you. So as I'd mentioned before, I think that, you know, it is very much individualized. It's very much what's going to work for you. So please, yeah, contact us if you want some help with that.
Someone's commented, in order for the employer to put in place the appropriate reasonable adjustments, it might be necessary to tell them what the disability is.
So it shouldn't be in the recruitment process. So for interviews or, you know, tests or anything like that, you don't need to tell them what the actual condition is. It's more about what the adjustment is that you need. Things do change once you're made an offer of employment. So they can ask you, or you might want to tell them what your neurodivergence is at that stage. But prior to that, they don't need to know. Because if you think about it, if I said, I have dyslexia, that doesn't really tell you what adjustments I'm going to need. And you could have 5 people with dyslexia who would have different needs, who would have different adjustments. So yeah, that's why we always base it on very much individualized support.
We've got a few more questions, or we can wait a bit later if you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll carry on, and then yeah, and then we can go through some more questions. Okay, thank you. So looking now at the disabling practices and environments. So rigid entry criteria. So some of you, may be applying and you may have come across this. Some organizations seem to have, or may seem to have, a strict criteria in place before they will consider a candidate. So for example, they may require consistently high grades throughout education or university. They might expect a candidate to have work or internship experience, have extracurricular activities, or an expectation of degree completion in a certain time. And for a neurodivergent candidate, these expectations can seem problematic or can be difficult. So for example, a late diagnosis could mean that grades were lower than before the diagnosis was made. Perhaps there were no adjustments in place before that time. And then when the adjustments have been in place, you're able to see an increase in those grades. There may have been a lack of knowledge about the availability of adjustments that could have made getting work experience more difficult. Or, you may have been concentrating on your degree and not able to get work experience because, you've been really focusing on making sure that you get your studies completed. So there could be a number of reasons why your profile may look a bit different and may not meet this rigid criteria that is set by some employers. Sometimes it takes people longer to do their degrees as well. Maybe it's not just the 3 or 4 years, but maybe you've had to extend the time you've taken to do your degree by a year also. So for this, we would look at adjusted screening criteria, or adding some detail around mitigating circumstances. So this would be an adjustment that we feel is often overlooked, and that's asking an employer to adjust their initial selection criteria when presented with a candidate whose condition may be the cause of an atypical profile. So admittedly, it's not something that you would necessarily feel comfortable doing, but this is something that we do on a regular basis. And our employer partners in particular are open to having a look at that rigid criteria and adjusting that, slightly, and putting in those adjustments for that individual. So yeah, if you were going to look at asking for this adjustment yourself, you could explain that your profile doesn't meet all the criteria, but that is due to the impact of a disability. You don't have to go into detail about the nature of your condition, but simply the impact that it's had on you, so that you can explain that difference in profile. So the important thing here is to ask early enough, so preferably before you submit the application, although what you might find is that there is a space on the application, under other information or extenuating circumstances, and here you can always add some information about this. And I appreciate that might feel quite daunting, but again, we're really happy to help you write something that can explain why your profile looks different in a really positive way as well. So, we're really happy to help with that. So please do let us know. It's something we do very often, and we're really happy to help you with that. So psychometric and other tests. You may find that employers that you're applying to will require you to sit one or more tests as a form of that, very first screening. Some of these tests involve making situational and social judgments, which, you know, can be particularly difficult for some neurodivergents, especially if you're on the autistic spectrum. Those sorts of tests can be quite difficult to understand what they're actually asking for. And often these types of tests involve short-term memory processing, which again can pose particular difficulties with various neurodivergent conditions. Sometimes these tests will be timed. Quite often the situational judgment tests are untimed, but even though, you know, it doesn't make these tests any more simpler or any easier for some people with a neurodivergence. So adjustments. So for any timed assessments, you can, of course, always request extra time and rest breaks. Employers, in our experience, often try to provide you with the same amount of time that you've had for university exams. But depending on the type and length of the test, you could have a case for requesting more time than you receive for university exams, as the tests they're very different most of the time. You know, they might be a 20 or 30-minute multiple choice test rather than an hour or two sort of essay-based exam. So they're very, very different. And they also sometimes require you to process a lot of information in the short-term memory. So the amount of additional time or breaks might not be the same as what you've had in education. In fact, it can also be possible that for a neurodivergent candidate to sit these types of tests can be, you know, it might be that it's not possible without them being at a significant disadvantage. So it can be due to the impact of that neurodivergence, and individuals are unable to demonstrate their true capabilities when it comes to these types of tests. And that's regardless of how much extra time you're given or if the test is untimed. So it might be in these types of cases that we, in our case here, we would sometimes request that the candidate is granted an exemption from that part of the process. Employers, you know, should agree to this, especially if they're going to be assessing the candidate many more opportunities, you know, further down the process. So yeah, that is something worth considering. You know, if you've taken lots of those tests with lots of time and you're still not getting through them, you know, it might be that it's just going to be extremely difficult for you to do so because of your neurodivergence. You might need to use your specialist software for a written assessment. So our advice here is to make sure that your software is compatible with the assessment, as this might not always be the case. Always make sure you know exactly what the process is going to be so that you can check compatibility of your software. And you can always ask to complete a written assessment on a platform that is compatible with your software and then transfer over to the online platform. So for example, with the Financial Conduct Authority, who we work with, they use one of those online assessment centres like TopScore, I think it's called. But for the written assessment, there's no spell check, no grammar check. So what we had agreed with them is that the candidates can complete their written task on something like a Word document, use their software, you know, whether it's Grammarly or, you know, one of the other ones, and then transfer it back over to the assessment center platform. So it's worth asking if there's something like that you can do. So for interviews, assessment exercises, there are a number of ways of which interviews can contain barriers. The form of the interview can be problematic for some neurodivergent candidates. For an example, virtual interviews can feel quite tiring, feel a bit intrusive, or it might be difficult to use coping mechanisms. Telephone interviews can be particularly difficult as well. And of course, pre-recorded video interviews, these are often, you know, timed. It's quite a short time that you have to prepare the answer and then deliver the answer. And, you know, sometimes it just can feel very uncomfortable recording your answers. And I think the other issue sometimes with interviews is that if they contain ambiguous questions questions that might be scenario based, or again requires repeated short-term memory processing, these can be tricky. There can also be interviewers' wrong assumptions about what certain behaviors mean, such as lack of eye contact, or somebody might be fidgeting, and that could result in an unfair assessment. And the type of assessment could also be problematic, for example, if they are using group exercises. So just looking at a few of the adjustments that can be put in place. Obviously, this is an exhaustive list. There are, like I was saying, it's all very individualized, but these are just some examples. So for assessment exercises, obviously extra time, rest breaks, providing the questions in a written format in advance, or be able to use a separate room for, a written assessment or some sort of exam. Often as well, one of the most impactful adjustments is the adjustment of perception. So asking the interviewer not to draw negative conclusions about behaviours. And again, employers tend to be open to this. So other specific examples we can have a think about would be to request to have your camera off for all or part of a virtual interview. You can request to have an in-person interview instead of a virtual one, or vice versa. And for pre-recorded video interviews, you could have extra time, or a live video interview, over Zoom or something, or in person. Or you could have a telephone interview, again, if that's a better format for you. So more time to think through the answer to the questions, because, there can be that awkward pause while you're trying to think through what you want to say, and, having that pressure of feeling like you have to give an answer really quickly, can result in you making errors. So just making sure you've got that extra time to think through what you want to say can be really important. And being allowed to have notes before answering the questions, being allowed to make a few notes and plan your answers more effectively can be really useful. Asking for the questions in advance or in a written format so that you can read through those as well as hear them during the interview, that can really help with processing. It might be that you need rest breaks or, as I mentioned, additional thinking time. The interviewer might need to repeat the questions, or they might need to provide clarification, all of which, again, are adjustments that can be made. On a virtual interview, they could add the captions, make sure captions are enabled, or again, writing the questions in the chat if you need to see the questions written down. For any long questions with lots of parts, you can ask to have these broken down into smaller parts. And then finally, as we sort of mentioned before, thinking about those perceptions from the interviewer, so not misinterpreting, difficulty in making and maintaining eye contact, or low energy as disinterest, when those could be linked to the neurodivergence, and not drawing conclusions about someone who interrupts, and focusing on the content of what's being said rather than the delivery. So non-adapted work environments. So this, just talking very briefly about the workplace. I know we're focusing on the recruitment process here, but once in a role, there may be other challenges, often things which neurotypical workers are unaffected by, or don't even realize. So for example, there's a couple of adjustments that I can think of here that can really help, that have helped other people, making sure that instructions are very clear, making sure that any unexpected changes to a project or working structure or day, they can be things that can really throw people. So the adjustments for those, there are a very wide range of adjustments that can be made in the workplace that can be very helpful, such as having a provision of a quiet room, knowing where that is, where a quiet space is. Noise cancelling headphones can be very helpful. Training for managers and team members, making sure specialist software packages are available and in place, making sure that people can have extra time if they need it. Use of a dictaphone can be very helpful, and providing clear instructions, making sure that if there's any changes coming up, for some people, that's really important for them to know about that in advance. So yeah, these are just some examples of adjustments. Obviously, the list, is not exhaustive by any means. And, all adjustments should be tailored to each individual and how their particular neurodivergence impacts them for that particular recruitment process. We know it can feel very daunting asking for adjustments. And you might not even be aware of the adjustments that you need. For example, the question that we had earlier. So, we've been advising on adjustments for many, many years and for many different conditions, many different roles. So yeah, please talk to our student support team who are here to help you. Should we have a couple of questions now before I go on to the next one?
Yep. Do you know where neurodivergent people can get career advice if you don't know what job you want?
I would try your careers service at university first. Fantastic career services there. And then if there's particular, questions that come up around neurodivergence, then you can be referred to us and we can talk about that. But yeah, I think, in terms of careers, really go for what you want to do. And then the adjustments can obviously be put in place for you, either in the recruitment process and in the workplace.
And then someone asked, are your services available to recent grads as well as, or only current students?
Yeah, to recent grads as well, yeah.
The initial online application process for almost all graduate jobs, it seems, are extremely difficult for me and hugely time consuming due to combination of disabilities. Is there any tactic to get around this?
I mean, yeah, they are time consuming, in terms of a tactic to get around it, I guess, the more you do, the easier it becomes. And you can, for some of them, you can use the same or very similar answers, as long as you're making sure you change it and adapt it to suit that particular employer. Don't leave the name of other employer in a different one's application or anything like that. But I think, unfortunately, you do need to do them. And, it is true, they do take time. But I think if you can sort of save if it's like long answer questions, if you can save those each time, that can be really helpful. And it does get easier. Again, if you can use the career service, you've got us as well. We can have a look through, your answers as well to those questions, if that would be helpful to you.
Is there a best way or approach of informing the potential employer? I think they're talking about adjustments. Or disability, I think.
Yeah, so talking about, with adjustments, you want to make sure it's specific and tailored to the particular part of the process that you're applying to. And then with disability, it's obviously you don't have to do that at all, at any stage. And you certainly don't have to do it in the recruitment process. But if you wanted to say the particular disability you had in the workplace, once you had been made the offer, then you could do that. Generally, it probably means sitting down with someone in human resources and talking to them about your particular situation. But I think, always having that sort of positivity along with it. Perhaps you have been through some difficult situations, or you feel that it has made you more resilient. So always trying to think about that sort of positive angle, I think, is probably the best way. And I guess not going into lots of detail, because you might not want to share that anyway. That's not something that everybody wants to share. Okay, I'll carry on. So I think we've got one more slide here about invisible barriers and others' attitudes. So others' attitudes, there could be an ignorance of the law. So the Equality Act is a very powerful piece of legislation. And as I already mentioned, we were just talking about then, potential employers are not allowed to ask any health or disability related questions during the recruitment process, only whether you need adjustments. But your protections go further than this. So they're not allowed to ask you to provide any evidence. So they can't ask you for your educational psychologist reports or for any medical records. And they're not allowed to ask you what adjustments you would need in the workplace if you were successful. Only once you've been made that offer. So they can't ask you, let's say you're having the interview, you've asked for some adjustments. They can't also ask, oh, well, would you need those adjustments in the workplace? They have to be kept very separate. Unfortunately, sometimes there can be ignorance of the Equality Act. So many employers do still ask questions that aren't permitted. We do know that some of our students and graduates are asked to provide evidence of disability, and asking them to name their condition so they can make the adjustments. But, this isn't permitted in the recruitment process. Employers can and should make adjustments without receiving any documentation. They don't need that in order to make the adjustments. So know your rights, and politely decline to answer any questions if you don't want to, because you don't have to provide any information if you don't want to. But of course, if you are comfortable to do so, that's fine too. It is your choice. The Equality Act provisions we've spoken about, do minimize the impact of discrimination. However, I think sometimes it does still exist, sometimes without malicious intent, but the fact of asking for adjustments can cause an employer to draw conclusions about the nature of the underlying condition and whether the candidate can do the job or not. So, candidates do fear of discrimination, and that can be a barrier as well, in the sense that a student who is worried about being discriminated against might not ask for the adjustments that they need. So, we would say, please do ask for the adjustments you need and don't worry about discrimination. You have a far better chance of success with the adjustments in place. There are, so many more enlightened employers these days, and more than that, employers are actively seeking neurodiverse candidates. If you do, unfortunately, I hope you don't come across an employer who discriminates, then they're not going to be the right employer for you, and they're the ones who've lost out on the great opportunity of employing talent. So yeah, that's what I would say to that. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it wouldn't be an employer you would want to work at. There can still be some ignorance around neurodivergence, a lack of understanding about how differently each person's condition impacts them. So, an individual may have come across someone with a neurodivergent condition or one or more individuals and assume that the next person with the same condition requires the same adjustments. So they may apply these biases based on imperfect knowledge, but what they would be assuming is that certain conditions lend themselves to certain jobs, but other roles are not possible. So, for example, stereotyping that autistic people might be very good at coding or maths, but can't do sales, or someone with ADHD would be a great entrepreneur, but might not be suited to accountancy, for example, and so on and so on. So yeah, that's where some of these thoughts might come in. So what we would say to this is explain, or we can explain for you, that your adjustments are specific to you and to you only, and for that particular process. There is no one size fits all. There's no menu of adjustments. There's no prescriptive list. And, for example, if an employer tells you that the adjustment they offer is 25% extra time and that's it, and this isn't what you need, politely explain that your need is different. And we can also have that conversation on your behalf. And if you apply for a role where you suspect you may not have got through because of your condition, you can sort of choose what you want to do. Perhaps you will choose not to mention your disability, or perhaps you will choose to talk about it and challenge perceptions. But whatever you do, don't allow anyone else's perception to decide what you want to do. You are the best judge of what you can do. And wrong interpretations and assumptions. So similar to what we had touched upon earlier, whereby an interviewer may misinterpret behaviours which are part of your condition. So here's where attitudinal adjustments come into play, where an interviewer or an assessor needs to adjust their own perceptions and their wrong assumptions. So neurodivergence as a positive. So you may want to evidence a skill or a competency during a process. Maybe you feel that your neurodivergence gives you an edge, an added skill such as creativity, perhaps thinking differently from others in a team. It's giving you extra focus, tenacity, or maybe because of your neurodivergence, you've had to learn excellent coping skills, and you've developed resilience, all competencies and attributes that an employer will value. You might want to access disability positive schemes. So take advantage of programs and schemes that are specifically targeted at people with disabilities generally, or specific conditions. Obviously, you've got our programs you can apply to through EmployAbility. There's Disability Confidence Scheme, where employers commit to recruiting more people with neurodivergence and disabilities, and they have to meet certain criteria to show their commitment. So you might see a symbol, disability positive. They can be good employers to apply to. So yeah, explaining a profile difference, use it to your advantage, and don't view it as a negative. So is the employer inclusive? If you are comfortable talking about your condition, or even if you're not, but simply ask for adjustments, the employer's response will be a good place to make an initial assessment about whether they are truly inclusive, and whether you really want to work for them. So they are assessing you in the recruitment process, but at the same time, you are also assessing them. Are they being positive about being inclusive of difference? If they're not, and they're holding back on making adjustments or making it all seem overly difficult, is it really somewhere you want to work? So I hope that was helpful. We have got about 10 minutes for questions. If there's any more questions that anybody wanted me to answer even.
Yep. Do organizations get funding/support in order to provide you with adjustments due to the cost of living? I don't know if organizations would want to exert effort in making adjustments.
So do the employers receive funding for adjustments if there's a cost associated? Was that the question? Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say?
Sorry, just recapping the question. Is it, do the employers receive funding to make the adjustments?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they do. So there is a program called Access to Work, which is a government funding that provides the cost for adjustments for an individual to have the adjustments at work. So if you needed any software, anything like that has an associated cost with it, then Access to Work will provide the funding for that. So as the individual, as the employee, you have to make the application yourself, but it does provide up to 100%. Basically, it will provide 100% of that cost. So let's say you did need some software what you do as soon as you're made the offer of employment, you would start the application, even if you're not going to start for a few weeks, and then you start that process, and they will pay for those associated costs. Yeah.
Is it still the case that employers can't ask about your sick record?
If it's related to disability, no, I don't think they can. I might, if you've got more detail on that, I can always come back to you if you wanted to email us with that particular question, just so I can double check, but I don't think they are allowed to, no.
Might they not need to see some official documentation in order to put in place some more complex adjustments?
They shouldn't need to do that, not in the recruitment process. There should be any reason why they wouldn't be able to make the adjustments. I wouldn't have thought so. Obviously in the workplace things do change, and then at that stage, yes, they may well need the documentation, especially like you say, if things were a bit more complex. But in the recruitment process, I wouldn't have thought so. I can't think of anything that would be so difficult that they wouldn't be able to make that, or that they would need some sort of documentation for that.
Can an employer refuse to make adjustments if they feel that it would be disruptive to their workplace?
No, I mean, the only time what they would have to do is they would have to put a very, very strong case forward as to why the adjustments couldn't be made. But it would be very, very unlikely if the person was unable to do the job because they couldn't put those adjustments in place, then that's different. But if something was a bit disruptive, then that wouldn't be counted. I think there's only times where, let's say, a building is listed, or like a listed building, or it's a protected building, and the adjustment was to make some changes to that building. Obviously, that wouldn't be able to be done. But it's only in very extreme cases, I think, where where an adjustment couldn't be made, or if they had to change the whole entire internal computer system, to make something compatible, then they may have a case then, but it would have to be something quite extreme.
Someone's elaborated to their previous question about the sick, what was it? Sick record. For example, if you had regular time off because of your autism due to depression, anxiety, etc., would that need to be declared? It's been some time, but I was told that an employer can't ask you to declare on that application.
I don't think you would have to, because it is disability related. So I don't think you would have to do that, because it's not like sick days, it's disability related time away. So it wouldn't be this, I don't think it would fall under the same category. But if you want more information on that, if that's not enough of an answer, I can definitely look into it further. And then if you wanted to email us, we can talk to you about that, if it's something you're worried about.
Someone's asked, are there not cases of some students who aren't entitled to adjustments, saying that they need them?
I don't think so. So yeah, I do know what you're saying. Somebody could ask for extra time if they didn't have a disability, didn't need it. But I think for the most part, most people are more worried about asking for the adjustment. They're more worried about that side of things rather than, the other way. I think if somebody asked for an adjustment and they didn't need it, it would be very, very unlikely.
Someone's asked, are there structured methods to identify the positives of your neurodivergence if you're uncertain? that you can present to your employer?
Any structured way. So I think, it's going to depend on you as an individual, and sort of sitting down and thinking about your strengths, and if you feel that is a strength that's related to your neurodivergence. Some of the things I mentioned earlier, perhaps you're very, very focused. Perhaps you think more creatively. Those sorts of things can be seen as being, a very positive side of having your neurodivergence. And, it is part of you, and it makes you who you are. So, thinking about the qualities that you have and how you can, use those as positive attributes that employers will want people to have. There's obviously resilience and determination, especially if, things perhaps have been difficult, or it was a later diagnosis, perhaps, you had to show real determination and strong resilience to get where you are, even though, you perhaps had a bit of a struggle to get there.
Someone's asked, how would you know if an employer has not offered you the role due to your neurodivergence? And if this is the case, what would you do next? P.S. This hasn't happened to me, but I just want to know for the future.
Yeah, of course. It probably would be very difficult to know, I think. That's the sad truth. They could give you some feedback that, could be quite sort of generic, and it would be very, very difficult to tell. You may have a feeling that was what it was to do with, but I think it would be very difficult to tell. I think, if there was something you wanted to do about it, I mean, unless you had sort of concrete evidence, it would be very difficult to take it further. But I think, as we had mentioned in the talk, is that really an employer that you want to work for? If they are not open to making adjustments, if they're not open to having diverse people working for them, then I think it wouldn't be somewhere that you would want to work. It wouldn't be a very inclusive environment, and it wouldn't be somewhere perhaps that you would want to be. But no, thank you. It's a good question. I really hope it doesn't happen to any of you. If you feel that it does, you can talk to us about it, and we can have a chat about it and see if there is anything to be done, or, what to do in terms of next steps.
I think that's all the questions, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's excellent timing, because it's now 3:01. Well, thank you all very, very much, and thank you for your questions. Please do reach out to us. There's our contact details. I think Mariella is going to add a feedback form to the chat, so please do take a couple of minutes to fill that out for us. But yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you.